If you go to the Zoom,
There.
it actually shows up as.
There. We're live, folks.
Yeah, good, thank you. Good morning, and welcome to this special meeting of Mahone Bay Town Council on a very wet Thursday morning after a very windy night. I trust if you're watching us, that the power is on where you live. There are some spot outages that they're cleaning up on the town staff. I don't know. Welcome. And we have all members of council and some staff here this morning. And you have an agenda, which we'll get to once we acknowledge that we are gathered this wet morning in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This morning, we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. The meeting is called to order. You do have an agenda that was emailed out to you, but there is one amendment, and that is to add a paragraph or a section 2B, and that will be a very brief closed session at the end of the budget discussion, and that is under 22(2)C Part E, contract negotiations with the town. So with that, I would call for a motion to approve the agenda as amended. Councilor Carroll moves, Councilor Rose seconds on the motion. All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you.
Your worship, if they have a question. So council has been provided with some documents that have been financial information, and does the public have access to that information?
Yeah, it is, well, it's on the website. Oh,
It's all on the website.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
So there was no special mail, it's posted on the website.
Yes, just meeting packages under.
It's under the meeting package.
Where it would be, yeah.
Okay. So let's go to the first item on our agenda, which is the beginning of our budget discussion for the development of the budget for 2024-25. And did you want to comment?
Oh, very briefly, and then, kind of set the stage. So I wanted to hopefully cover two things this morning, which has become tradition. We have a whole pre-budget, I think we started this last year. It's a good idea. There's two things that we would cover. One is getting the input from council members that will help Ashley to prepare the budget so that we have a quicker, easier budget process, and things that are expected are included. And we don't need to get down into all the details today, but we do want to kind of get a general sense of where council members are around rates and capital spending and how we would approach those things. And then we'll come back and draft, and I'm sure we'll have discussions and make changes and have a final version. The other thing I wanted to cover hopefully today is just an overview of the actual process that we're anticipating this year, the dates that have been saved in your calendar, and how we thought that would go. I know there's been an interest in a tighter budget process this year. Hopefully that's something we can achieve. So don't let me forget to call back to that. I think we usually do this round table with everybody sharing thoughts, but this year I think that's like a good discussion. So those are the only comments I want to make off the top. Ashley and I are here to answer questions.
Okay, thank you. And Ashley's going to lead us in this discussion.
Yeah, so welcome to our pre-budget meeting for 24-25. So I've been working on the budget for the last month or so, and we're kind of at the point now that in order to make our actual budget discussions as efficient as possible, because sometimes they can get long. I enjoy them, but I like numbers, so but we thought it'd be a good idea to get together and just sort of gauge what your expectations for this budget would be. So as Dylan mentioned, rates, I would like to discuss those. Where do we feel with the tax rate, the fire rate? That'll help drive the revenue stream, of course. That'll help drive, where our capital spending is going. Everything, as I see the expenses trending right now, they're not increasing as much as they have the last couple years for the operating expenses, which is nice, but like everything else, they're still high, so keep that in mind with in your discussion. If we can get into any capital discussion, that would be great. And then as Dylan said, the overall process and what you guys want to see, for our first, obviously for the first presentation, I'll just be providing all the information to you guys, but then how do we want to structure it? Do we want to, carve out a day for capital, carve out a day for operating, carve out a day for utilities? It'd be good to get, an exact where we want to be and how we want to get there, before we're there, so that we can make this as effective and as efficient as possible. So, a lot of these documents that are on the website have already been provided to, the audit committee. So the discussions have been had. So I think the first thing we should discuss are rates. Everyone, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I would rather we discuss the process.
Okay.
And agree on the process, and then talk about the utilities, but I think for me, the process will allow us to figure out how this.
What direction?
What direction we're doing,
Sounds good to me.
if folks are okay with
I
that.
haven't had coffee yet, so you're leading it.
Not leading, but suggesting it, I
Nope,
would
it's
prefer
fine.
for us to have a 1 or 2 day conversation and finalize the budget for that, rather than the
So
segments. My time is getting crunched now, and I'll prefer to be able to project it, so this day I've never small portion of that, and I find that when it's a full day, I get fully in there, that's.
Yeah.
Councillor Fairwood?
I agree, in other council terms, we did have full day, budget discussions, and I found it much easier to keep the whole picture in my mind, rather than fragmented from piece to piece, so that worked well for me.
The CAO is next, but he and I had the discussion around the same thing. In the past, the norm was we would meet for a day. Lunch would be brought in, so you couldn't get away. But at the end of the day, we would have the bulk of the budget would have been in term CAO.
Yeah, so I think the deviation from that and spreading it out was, initially initiated from council saying. We felt like it was such a slog, it's exhausting, and we kind of felt by the end like we just had no choice but to roll over and let it go. So, we spread it out like that, I think to try to suit council's intention, but it certainly ended up as a longer process. I think there's something we can do in between. But I did want to say that one thing actually I have preferred, and I really strongly feel is helpful to council, is to have the presentation of the budget. And then a few days, and then this long discussion session that we're talking about. Because that way you do have some sort of time with the numbers, but we also get to present them to you before you have some time, which to be honest, I think anyone preparing a budget in Ashley's position wants to be able to speak to the document when they provide it and not have people just digging into it on their own. So if we could get an evening presentation, a daytime discussion, that may be a good way to set it up. And I think that's actually what we have in the calendars for the first 2 budget meetings now.
That was my question, whether we were gonna have like a budget presentation separate. That would certainly be my preference as well, and I'm sure for you guys, so, yeah.
Councillor Wilson?
2 things. One of the reasons that we have those long days and we all roll over was because Jim always had the budget meetings in July. So it had to be done tomorrow. And now I'm gonna ask is if, and this is very selfish, but I don't know whether it's possible to have that 1 full day meeting before April 10th. Is that not possible?
I think we've had it right around that. I'm just trying to get to the council meeting calendar that we sort of.
Before April 10th, I could be here. After April 10th, I would sitting in Italy drinking wine.
We have it there.
Lots of room.
So I know we have other speakers, but if I could just respond to the question about the dates that we've had set for the budget. So we had it right after Kelly left, actually, what was scheduled. The 11th was the presentation and the 19th was the discussion. So if we could try to back that up, I guess at Ashley's discretion. We had counted on the budget meetings beginning after the council meeting on the 28th of March, because I've set expectations with committees that wanted to make recommendations and things like that, that they have to that date to get things through the council. But, I think we could do the presentation at Ashley's discretion as soon as possible after the 28th, so I don't know.
It's not a deal breaker, so you don't fuss on it.
The 8th, you're actually leaving, the Monday?
I'm looking at the 10th.
The 10th, okay. So on, we just scheduled policy and strategy for Monday night, the 8th, we, looking at the calendar now, we could do like the 4th and 5th. Oh, the 5th is, no, the 4th and 5th aren't holidays, and we have no meeting scheduled, so if we wanted to do the presentation the evening of the 4th,
Mhm.
then the question is just when can we get that day? And traditionally, I know for Deputy Mayor, we've been with that Thursdays and Fridays, I don't think that's necessarily the bottom line for you now. So, if we wanted to do the full day, it's just that the 8th has policy and strategy at night currently, the council is on the 9th at night currently. So if we wanted to do full day budget meeting, I guess I'd suggest that we don't want that policy and strategy meeting, we just schedule it for the 8th, but we can push that a week ahead, I mean, that's reasonable. So on the fly, that would give us the ability to start the budget on the 4th and then discuss it on the 8th, which is only separated by a weekend. But it is separated by a weekend.
Well, don't, excuse me, just don't change everything on my account, because I can still wait for with this.
So if we stick with it the way it is, it's the 11th for presentation, the 18th or the 19th for discussion. And we had the 26th, we're still over discussion, but we can try our best to keep it to the one day.
Just as an aside, you should let the IT staff know. And the CAO know. And they'll enable your laptop. To be usable from there.
And it doesn't,
Now they have to flip the big switch. And the CAO has to approve taking the laptop out of the country. I just went through this.
I'll just take my data.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, you could join the webmail in any way that you can join the webmail. So if that's, the Zoom is doing this, right?
Okay, so we're settling on the 11th and then.
So the 11th and the 19th is what's in the calendar. And so unless, if nobody's requesting it, if nobody's not requesting it, then that's what we have. The only thing about trying to keep to the 19th is then we're making amendments on the fly. So if anyone is considering amendments, it might be, more tricky for Ashley to figure out on the fly. You could, after the presentation, you can send an email and give us a chance to do whatever we can to be ready.
Yeah.
But I think we might want that 26 just as a, where do we discuss amendments, if there's still on amendments, but that's really down to council members, we obviously try to do our best to present a budget that doesn't require a lot of amendments, and then we're good, so.
So what time is the meeting on the 11th? Is that 9 o'clock?
Yeah, that would, no, so that would be a meeting, that would be,
Oh, evening.
and it'd be 2 hours, we'll keep it 2 hours percent. And I think we've been the last few years, pretty consistent, the presentation, that doesn't usually take more than 2 hours.
I can talk faster.
And we will continue to have the proposed budget package in the hands of council days before.
So no, and I guess that's the purpose of the presentation, is that we actually do present it that day. And the
So
days
we
before.
don't see it
the
before
discussion.
then?
We haven't traditionally. And that's to enable the person who worked so hard to put it together, to present it to council, as opposed to having it,
Critiqued.
deconstructed by email before the meeting.
Okay.
But then we won't discuss it that night, and we kind of have traditionally had a kibosh on the notion of jumping right in, we present, there's some questions are asked. But everybody gets to have the weekend to let it set in, and that's your time, Mr. Mayor, that you have to kind of pour over it.
Okay.
If that works for everybody, I mean, that's what we have done, and I think.
And the 19th is the other meeting?
The 19th is the discussion meeting, so that
So
would be,
all day.
that would be 9 AM and we'd go as long as we needed to. Probably Kelly will send that as 9 to 5 or something. We'll see what
And then
happens.
it's like the 26th
So whatever.
as an extra. It can't be-
Yes, the 26th is currently down as that extra, if we felt we were good to go or needed minimal revision. It could just go to the regular council meeting on the evening of the 25th, which, that's That's nicer because we do like to do approval at a regular council meeting. But it's all down to council discretion. The last thing we want people to do is really don't have time to discuss the budgets.
Do we remember when we completed our budget discussions last year? So April 19th sounds pretty spectacular.
Last year was later. Typically with the 2 years prior, we've been hitting the first main meeting for formal approval, pretty consistent. So we've been one meeting ahead. And I always say we could just move one meeting ahead twice, and then we'd actually be to the beginning of the year, which would be.
Amazing.
And the extra meeting is that an evening or a day?
The 19th.
The
26th, so that would be a daytime, and so at 9, and it.
Oh,
only
it's April
we-
26th.
Because that's practically possible. But that, as far as you wanted to discuss the process, that's good. And so, yeah, because we're planning to then have everything available to get into on the 19th. Like the expectation will be, as Stash's earlier point, we're talking operating and capital and utilities all in the same day. And we'll just, I think, work through it in whatever order seems logical, whether it's to do, town general operating, fire operating, water operating, electrical operating, and then all the capital. Or capital of each, I guess, get some feedback and actually can decide what kind of makes the most sense to everybody. I think that's what we'll do.
Sounds good to me.
So I think there may have been other hands up even before Francis's request that we talked about the process, and I'm just Mr. Mayor, if you had a pre-existing standing order.
No, I
or-
don't have any order other than have that discussion about the process.
So back to the general context, and if people want to chime in, I guess one quick note I didn't mention earlier, but actually. We know that the water rate process is working its way along, and obviously it will inform budget. What our expectation is at this point is, and it's reflected in the report council, says water rate. We will have a water rate report to council by the time of the budget. Whether that is provided to the council meeting on the March 28th, which would be my hope. We'll have to see, but by the time of the budget, we'll have a water rate study. Now, keep in mind, a water rate study does not specifically tie the council's hands to applying to the board for exactly what is being recommended by the water rate study. But I think, for prudence, actually will essentially have to use the water rate study information to inform the development of the water budget. And then if council gives us feedback when the rate study is presented, that we're not comfortable with the rate increases that would be projected, that will become part of the budget conversation. And then obviously the rates won't take effect until Q2, because at this point we haven't actually submitted an application, so we're not gonna make Q1. And with that, I guess, just turn it back over to, I just forgot to mention that earlier.
Yeah, no, that was a good point. Thank you. Okay, so if we're all settled on dates or.
Good.
Okay. I thought you were raising your hand.
know, it's all good.
Okay, so, did we want to discuss the assessment file? For 2024, it should say assessment file 2024. And that has all the rates on it, the tax rate, the fire rate. This is sort of the meat.
I would just, put my toes in, I guess, an area that I'm not fully comfortable in the sense like, there's some stuff that, Kelly shared around just what is overall rant has been about budget every year. Which I always appreciate. I always appreciate because I think it reminds me of, at the end of the day, that people will present and what is in the best interest of the folks. So as a very young person, if I assume that we're getting more money from our assessment, for the type of revenue, then be an increase in revenue to the town. And we just say we might not have a significant increase in expenses as has been the last 3 years. So if things stay the same,
Not as significant and expensive.
I was listen to the last year. If that's what the projection looks like, I guess a big question for us as council is, where are we going to put what might be extra, for example, is it back to the people with a rate decrease, or is it to keep up our reserves? Now, from my perspective, we have infrastructure needs that we will never touch up on. So I would think, it makes sense for us to at least try and make sure that at least we have something in the bank for us to be able to do the projects we're able to do. And as a citizen, I'd be saying, well, yeah, that makes sense, because I want to live in a town 10 years from now, but still be able to maintain something at the time. But somebody out in the city will be, well, I need some relief myself, and so from a financial perspective, what are your thoughts? What are the staff thoughts around that? That would be helpful for us to be having that conversation.
So I probably something to say too, maybe we take turns, but just, I guess, the way that I look at the growth and assessment, obviously, we always want to be conscious that it's a combination of new construction and assessment growth. So the assessment growth portion, I think it was 4.47% on residential. So it's usually what we're mostly talking about when we talk about people needing relief. So that 4.47% residential assessment growth is essentially right on Nova Scotia CPI, which is 4% this year. So, basically, when Ashley said our costs haven't grown, as much as they have in prior years, well, that's essentially reflected in the CPI. Last year's CPI was quite a bit higher. Everything grew, in our case as well, everything grew. So in this case, if you say, well, ours doesn't grow as much, basically across the board increases in electrical costs and fuel costs and chemical costs for treatment and all those kind of things have gone up, relatively speaking, by about that same amount. And so I think, my way of looking at it is the growth in assessments due to, actual raising values on properties pretty much corresponds directly with the raising costs of providing services in the town. And I would say that's a good reason to hold the tax rate flat. But there's also the new construction, and that's the new construction to me is an opportunity to think about, as the deputy mayor said, putting money ahead. New construction means new demands on services and infrastructure. It gives us a little bit of a leg up to think about new services and additional infrastructure spending. We have a lot of that. I think we should remember that there's a number of things coming from our partner organizations, the IMSAs that we're part of, and JSB in particular, in terms of new services that they've been talking about adding for the coming year, which the town will have to pay a share of. And also, unfortunately, this year area may run a deficit, which we would then need to contribute to. So there's a few things to consider on the growth in costs not associated with the same exact costs being more expensive to provide, but actually new services the council has been making commitments to add in the coming year. So we'll have that growth to consider, and basically we'd be splitting the new assessment due to construction between putting money towards capital spending and the additional services that we're expecting to be adding in the coming year, which would be, need to be funded from something other than just CPI inflation, because that's just standard pat. So from our perspective, I think there is a bit of an opportunity to look at how capital, the future and present, can be funded under the operating budget. But I think there's not enough to go around, even as it stands. Actually.
So what makes Mahone Bay unusual, and we've said this many times, is we have really two core categories of revenue. We have the revenue that we enjoy from the residential tax base, driven predominantly by assessment. Plus, we have these other non-traditional revenue streams that we've segregated historically. And the area tax, the unique, unusual infrastructure tax, periodic dividends from area, and the detransfer tax. So, like as I kind of review the year-end numbers, it looks like that category of revenue is materially underrunning what we originally thought we were going to enjoy this year. And who knows how you really project that revenue, as it is varied. So I think as this conversation unfolds, we've traditionally had streams of revenue that have exceeded our capital requirements, and we've never, ever until this fiscal year, ever needed, well, at least in the last 20 years, we've never ever needed to tap into town residential to fund capital. but that changed, but we're doing that now. So I just think as this conversation evolves over the next, few meetings, we just need to try to balance those two categories and make sure when we're talking the tax rate, that's one category, but that category also has to be influenced by what's happening on the other side. And I think what's happening and that other side is around 30% of the total revenue of the town 2 years ago. Now, that albeit that was a historical high because of COVID, but that other category is a large chunk of money that needs to be we just need to keep that in the front of our mind, that as that revenue unfortunately runs down a bit, we have to make that up. Anyway, we'll talk about it some more, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Finance manager.
And I just wanted to comment that, like, if you say there's extra money, I just want to make sure that like the people at home understand that it's not. There's things that need to be spent. There's money that, there's expenses. The expenses are still going up. They may not be going up as rapidly, but they're still going up. So we need to pay for that. We're having a lot of capital expenses. We have a lot of big plans. So I just want to say that, the term extra, we're not, it's not raining money. And I just want to make that clear that there is a need for all the money that is there's a need for the revenue that we're charging. There's a need for the rates. There's a need for, even the utility rates. There's a need for that to cover our expenses. So I just wanted to make that clear that.
Just Councillor Feeney's comments reminded me that I think fire deserves particular attention at the current time, because one area that we had acknowledged that it really isn't possible to keep up with capital expenditures out of the dedicated capital streams that we've traditionally relied on has been within fire, because of the construction of the new facility, which was long overdue, admittedly needed to be done, and because of the purchasing of equipment, which again is necessary to keep up with expectations and service going forward. The council did decide to 3 years ago now to institute a fire rate and to essentially try to put the fire capital into that fire rate. And it is offset by fundraising. The department does a lot to try to offset that through fundraising activities and donations, but ultimately those just simply aren't enough to keep up with the capital. And based on the cost increases in any constructed, everybody be well aware over the last couple of years, it's tough to keep up. So I do want to call council's attention to the fact that currently Town General is subsidizing fire to assist with the payment on capital. And one of the things that we hope to do is to close that gap. Because essentially we've reached a parity where residents in town and residents outside of town serving the department are contributing equally to the cost of the department. And on top of that, town residents are further subsidizing the cost of the department to a tune of, it was about 127,000 in the last year's budget. Fire service costs will not grow in proportion with fire service revenue. So if the tax rate stays pat, we do expect that outside of capital, progress is being made, so the fire rate as it stands will contribute more to capital this year than it could last year. I think that's fairly safe to say, but not nearly enough to close that gap. And that doesn't even take into account the future infrastructure spending we reviewed recently when discussing truck purchases over the next 20 years. So all that considered, I think, one area to think about is the fire rate. And it's significant to consider that if we agreed even today that the fire rate could increase, we could also give notice to the outside areas to anticipate a potential increase. Because I think any increase advisably at this point, as we have parity on the rates, should apply to both town and outside areas. And even if that increase were a 0.5 cent, it would at least get things moving in the direction that they need to anticipate future capital. So just as a underlying idea, getting fire to be actually financed through the fire rate is still the objective, and we're still not there at this point.
Okay. Any other comments? If I could, we also have to be mindful that the 1,048 citizens that are sitting over here in our town who are paying the tax rate, who are paying for the fire department, they're dealing with a 30% increase in their electric bill. They're going to be possibly dealing with an increase in their water bill. the grocery costs that the families are experiencing are beyond their control. They can't control what their properties are assessed at. So they're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place in the sense that they can't adjudicate what portion of their income goes to provide them a place and a means to live on a day-to-day basis. And I think as council, we need to be mindful of that. It's not just about how much money the town needs. It's about the citizens and what their breaking point might be because of other costs over which they have no control. Councilor Wilson.
Thank you. A couple of things. The sentiment about taking whatever revenue we have coming in because of the growth of the town. And earmarking that for whatever might happen to be something capital anyway. It's fine with me. I think what I want us to be careful and aware of is the average taxpayer has no idea whether or not it's tax rate or general operating costs, nor do they care. So if we increase the tax rate or the fire rate by a cent or whatever it is, it's a tax increase. That's all I know what we all care about. I think we need to understand that the difference that we make between the money that goes to fire and the money that goes to town is a arbitrary distinction that we make in this room and nobody else in every town cares about.
No.
So I think the tax increase is a tax increase, and I would be vehemently opposed to that in today's circumstance. I think it's perfectly okay to say that the 6% or so increase in revenue that is attributed to new construction and the nursing home and so on and so forth can be earmarked for other things. And I'd be perfectly happy to put some of that in fire because a chunk of our capital that we spent in the last year or so is directly attributed to the new nursing home. And some of that can be used for new construction. I'm talking about ladder trucks and this sort of thing. So, well, I guess my bottom line is I would like to see the rate cap this year for sure again. And but Ashley do her genius and allocate the funds appropriately and budget them that way. So it isn't just a block hole out of which we take funds at the end of next year and say, okay, something will operating and something in capital. Something over here that we need to know going in and that money's going to go.
CAO and then Councilor Carver and then Councilor Knapp.
I wanted to speak to David's comments about relief for taxpayers, but just first off, but quickly, one thing you could consider, because you're totally right that, you know, if fire rate goes up, tax rate stays the same, town residents do pay more, is, you know, I hate to suggest lowering the tax rate, but if you increase the fire rate and you decrease the tax rate by an equivalent amount, you'd still be increasing the outside fire rate, which would maintain parity there. Would actually bring in twice as much revenue for fire as was lost on general. And ultimately, since $127,000 in general is going to fire anyway, we might still be wise to consider that. And again, you're not gonna hear me suggest that we lower the town general tax rate very much. That's not, I don't think responsible to that.
A whole course in your second.
But I do think that may be an option council might want to consider. If you're trying to keep parity tax rate in town, but also acknowledge that town residents are currently subsidizing fire service to the areas outside of town. Might be something to consider. And David, in terms of targeted relief, I just always want to mention, we do provide targeted relief in two ways. One is not of our consent, and Joe talked about this a lot, which is the cap on assessment. Provide substantial relief to people on the basis of whether they lived in their home for a long time. But it's not targeted necessarily to people who need it most. The correlation, I think, was intended to be there between people who lived in their home for a long time and people who didn't have means. But that was, a long time ago. That was the promise's intention, where we all had thoughts about whether that's working today. But we also have a relief program for low-income individuals in town. And it's something that we do talk about every year in the budget, and perhaps this year requires more consideration. One limitation of that program is that it can't provide relief on utility bills And in fact, due to the regulator, we're not allowed to provide relief on utility bills. But most of the utility ratepayers are town taxpayers. And so when we take the approach that it's one wallet, relief on taxes translates into relief overall. And so, offering more generous relief on taxes is a way to address rising costs across the board. So just to the mayor's point, we may want to, and actually I'm sure bring statistics to council on how to utilize the current program for low income relief is.
Councilor Carter.
Thank you. I just hope that, I imagine that we will all have in mind, that even though we have big plans, as Ashley, to quote Ashley, we do have a lot of big plans and big ideas, and that we really work hard to prioritize those to be sure that, we're spending money where it needs to be spent and not on a must-do, not want-to-do basis. So that be a guiding principle is to get deeper into the nitty-gritty.
Thank you. Councilor Now.
Yeah, I'd just like to comment on Kelly's thing. I strictly agree that we should not be increasing our tax at this time. Because taxpayers just can't pay it. We've got a lot of other expenses. I'm sure we can do the budget with capital and deficit, but we can certainly make some cuts to allow for it. We did separate the fire rate, and as far as your side rate goes, at one time we had the pretty much the cheapest rate going. Now we're getting into one of the most expensive rates going for fire rates. If we're gonna mix up, you gotta mix up. So really don't, I don't care how we figure it out, but overall, I don't think tax.
Councilor Feeney.
So like, this is the annual ritual where politicians, municipal politicians around the table, myself included, say, we don't want to raise taxes and we would rather decrease taxes. And then we spend the next 12 months making a lot of decisions that drive the math behind why we need to charge what we charge. So I just think we should just, over the course of the next few meetings, I think we're going to find that, the levers for tax relief are limited based on decisions that we made over the last 4 or 5 years, and decision and funding that's available to us that we don't take advantage of will be lost. So I think without getting too policy wonky, we also have this discussion around the water rate study. And we all know that our water rates, I believe, are some of the highest in the province, if not the highest, maybe the highest in Canada for all I know. But they're high because we've got, 2024 infrastructure requirements, and we only have 1,000 people. So, and we know the math will never be able to drive that if you just look at a traditional rate study. We also have a massive subsidization of water coming from the hydrant fund, which is paid through by fire. So you've heard my rant on this before. We don't need to go into it now, but in the fullness of time, we need to make sure that the right basket of people are paying the appropriate amount of taxes for the appropriate amount of services that they've asked for. And some of these policies are long-standing, way before any of us came around. 25 years, I'm sure that the hydrant rate's been $185,000 a year, right? It's been forever. So we've been extracting that money from fire out of the 22-cent fire, which is really the 9 cents plus the 11, and funding water. All I'm saying, we're not going to solve that this time. Like right in the next 3 months, we're not going to solve that. But a future council hopefully will figure out the right balance between, really we're asking for money from fire and we're just simply sending it over to the water utility, and the water utility is getting that revenue. But anyway, you got the point. I mean, there are structural issues with the way the taxes have been organized historically. We're not going to solve them in the next 90 days, but there should be a plan to eventually, fix these things so that they're logical. Anyway.
We've got 8 months to do this.
Well, hope springs eternal.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So just to cancel the announcement of the fire rates, I just wanted to be clear to anybody watching, our town fire rate is comparably, including hydrants, compares unfavorably, obviously, to most of the outside of town areas in the county, because they don't have hydrants. The adjusted equivalent rate in town, not including hydrants and outside of town, is equal, is 11 cents. That is actually the second lowest rate amongst about 30 different fire jurisdictions in the county, according to MODL's website.
Mhm.
So we are actually at the very lowest end
Mhm.
in terms of fire rates outside of town. Now, MODL's website doesn't list the rates in Bridgewater, including hydrants, and in Lunenburg, including hydrants. So I don't know how the rate we're paying in town, including hydrants, compares. But certainly increasing the out of town rate is something that at this point would only be keeping up with the reality that I think all the other departments outside of the towns have realized, which is that they needed to increase these rates, and they have, and most of them are more in the 15 and 17 range at this point. The one, unfortunately, that is lower than us is an adjacent district between here and Lunenburg, so that is often a point of comparison, but it is the only one lower than us. And then just to Councilor Feeney's point about water, obviously, you know, I think the strategy from an asset management perspective is your point about only 1,000 residents. The strategy has to be more customers. I mean, that really, as far as lowering the water rate to everybody, is the only way that will happen. And unfortunately, that also means investing in the infrastructure to serve more customers, which comes with upfront cost. So that's the challenge. Now, that upfront cost isn't borne by the water ratepayers, because the board prohibits expansion of infrastructure being paid for by the existing customer base, but it's still borne by the town and the town taxpayers, who are essentially the same group of people.
Deputy Mayor, thank you, Councilor Wilson.
No, he's very answering the question.
Is he?
Yeah, there's no nomination, something about us having the highest rate and then talking high one of the lowest, so that is different to that.
Which leads to my comment, which I think is that Dylan's notion about this idea of reducing the rate on assessed housing, you know, what we think of as our normal tax rates, and increasing the fire rate across the board to compensate is a kind of an elegant solution that gets us where we want to be in terms of total taxes, but also helps to bridge that, perceive that gap that we perceive between fire and I. So I would be kind of keen to have a look at that.
The other question I have is somebody who doesn't live where I don't, I live somewhere where now I'm not using a utility for power, and I don't get water, but I still paying a structure charge. And I know we talked about a way in which we can calm that charge that actually is meaningful to everybody who's receiving the services that we receive. And I think, so as if I was a council or becoming and asking why am I paying the same rate as councillor paying on this infrastructure charge, yet I'm not getting some of the infrastructure pieces in.
I pay $3.
It's actually an easy answer, so for anybody watching, I'm happy to provide it. So the regulation around electrical and water rates is that those rates do include all of the costs associated with electrical and water service. So if you don't get the service, you're not paying those rates, you're not contributing to that, there's no subsidization of that. The infrastructure charge is for all the other infrastructure that exists in town. So it's for streets, it's for recreational infrastructure, it's for administrative service infrastructure, it's for public works, all the things that everybody in town depends on.
Yeah.
So, that's the distinction. No one's paying through their infrastructure charge to backdoor subsidize electrical and water for people if they're not receiving it. But the infrastructure charge is for everything else.
So probably in the next tax bill, a description about that might be very helpful.
Just saying supports roads and recreational infrastructure. Yeah.
But I know this came up, there's somebody who put it in this last year, I thought it was back in my mind, it makes sense. That we just never got to that conversation, so having that description is very helpful, so that people understand what is that stuff for.
Is the infrastructure charge paid per PID?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you own 3 pieces of land, 3 PIDs, you pay it 3
I
times.
just like to talk about it, because I hear about it every day.
We can always model, the infrastructure charge is discretionary. you could just have it in general tax rate. We could always model what the tax rate increase would be if we wrapped up the infrastructure charge and put that back in general taxes. But to Councilor Feeney's point, by having the infrastructure charge and not usually using capital to fund, or revenue from general to fund capital, we've always been able to say that this infrastructure charge directly contributes to capital costs. Whereas if it's folded into general rates, it would be harder to make that distinction, yeah. So in a way, it at least is a little bit of a guarantee that that money that you're paying for each bid is only going for the capital infrastructure.
Other comments?
So is it too much to ask today? A range of numbers that I could sort of play with in regards to taxes and, you know, if we want to increase the fire.
Well, I think if we're down to general consensus that.
Yeah, like-
Fire going up and town general going down is the only change in tax rates that people, I mean, we could, ask around the table, but it seems like that may be the only.
Yeah.
Tax rates that people would want to see in the draft budget. And if so, it would be good to know how far up we're willing to consider the fire rate going.
Yeah,
Because just off the top, if we were only trying to close the gap on the current subsidization of fire service by town residents, that would actually be 6 cents, 3 cents, maybe 3 cents, I mean, it's 3 cents.
So I guess I have a question is if the fire rate goes up 3 cents. How much, how far down is the residential rate? Like?
It would be 3 down and 3 up.
Well, no, it wouldn't matter because there's more revenue fire from outside.
Would it still be the equivalent in town, 3 down, 3 up, because we'd be netting twice the return.
Yes.
Otherwise, it would be
Yeah.
6 and 6.
Yeah.
So,
Because we're trying to bring the extra revenue to fire.
Mayor,
so
so
still net out to this, sorry.
like part of this conversation is the art of persuasion. And be able to collaborate with our neighbors that don't have a representative on this table that don't establish the fire rate. So like, we're not a king in the court who will just simply send an email and tax without some level of discretion. So I think 3 is no.
Yes.
So, a half a point is,
3 cent increase in the fire rate?
yeah, is no, right? There's no way we're going to be able to communicate that and receive a favorable response for people who have other choices of where they receive fire services. So not everybody, you don't have to take it, you just choose to take it because for a number of historical reasons, but people do have choices where they get their fire services from, so it has to be competitive. And we have some specific competitive realities, especially down in the Mayor's Cove area. That's no surprise to anyone around the table. So like, let's just make sure we have the right messaging here in a public meeting, that we're not talking about a 3% fire rate increase. When that's a really bad idea, and let's just keep this on. Why don't we just put in a budget of if there's some consensus on -5 plus 5.5, I'm okay to start there.
Well, to just, I was, the sense that I got from the initial talking points is that there is an anticipated water rate increase, right?
Yes, I mean, yeah,
And
we haven't had one in a couple of years, so.
yeah, and if you go with the idea that, we increase, we want the effects not to be felt to a certain extent.
I mean, to a certain extent.
To a certain extent, we would love that notion that a tax increase effect and not effect, and so I'm sort of wondering. It would, because from my perspective, I feel for fire, but not as much as the water side. Because that rate being 6, I wouldn't be surprised that it would be the highest in Canada.
No, I agree.
Right, so
But even if we double, even if we increase the water rate by 10%, 20%, 30%, it's immaterial compared to the amount of capital we need. It's just like, there's no correlation between the revenue that the town receives and the cost of providing the service. Like, you're in parallel universes, and there's nothing that this council will do to be able to solve that in the short term. The only way through this, and I think Dylan has already made the point, is substantial customer growth. So I just think that the incrementality of spending a huge amount of time and effort adjusting the water rate by 20 grand a year relative to the millions of dollars we're spending in capital. This is like council is other things we should be spending our time on. We really almost have to hold our breath and wait until the growth shows up. And if the growth doesn't show up, it's a moot point anyway, because we're never going to be able to get an actual rate-based solution to water, because the water rate would have to double to get us back to where we need to be, right? From a regulatory perspective. Anyway, preaching to the converted here. But I just think we should just make, if we're going to spend a bunch of time talking about where we're going to provide incremental relief, water is probably is something we should keep at the top of our mind. But until I see the rate study, I wouldn't really want to dive off the diving board and try to fix that right now.
CAO?
And just one unfortunate point about the water and the idea of paying relief, because I already did the board wouldn't let us. One thing you can do, and I'm sure council has historically done, and Joe already said it's gotten us into a bit of a situation, is the hydrant charge serves as a subsidization
Yeah,
of the
no, it
water.
does. Yeah, you can't win. You
Yeah.
can't win, right? Fair enough. I mean, it's hard. I mean, this is a really difficult conversation, because like if you try to be kind of like intellectually honest about it,
Yeah.
the water rates should be triple what they are, which we all know is insane. It'd be the highest. It'd be like we're living in Dubai trying to get a water rate, right? So, like super expensive price points, but it's a function of a small town with a water system. Anyway, appreciate the converted there.
Good point.
Deputy Mayor, Councillor now?
Yeah, so in trying to run down the top, there is a lot of things in the water that start seeing this. If we talk about this elegant electrical, not fire rate and residential, I guess, cutting here, picking up there.
Rebalance.
And then you come over and say, well, we have this rate study, we increase water, then everything you've done there from the taxpayer perspective is moot.
Mhm.
And then so maybe the water study comes and it's just an intellectual exercise. If we know this is our challenges to a certain extent, where at least we know that it's documented that these are our challenges, but we have an agreement now that we're not touching anything on that side. And now this dance around playing with the other numbers makes sense. But if you're going to play with the numbers and then still come in and say, well, 20% increase in water, then you've done nothing to the event of that.
Councillor now is next to Councillor Brennan.
I agree with what Joe said about the fire rate. I think if we go between 0.5 and 1% increase, that's enough. I think we as hoping them might be willing to go to 1%, but I think it's at 11 now, is it? Even. So even if we went, say, hours right now, the total is 20.9, so we went 0.6, it put us up to the 21.5. And then they could walk about the same amount, so I don't think we want to jump a big rate on that, especially with the outlying areas at this time.
Councillor Payne, and Councillor Wilson.
Just one final point on the direction to Ashley, because I think this is really, this is gonna be a worthwhile conversation to just make sure we're all on the same page. So it's not crystal clear to me where we are as related to the province's FIR desire for minimum reserve levels. So just if part of the conversation, Dylan and Ashley, if you could come back and just make sure that we're all on the same page on, like, I know we're not going to get to the number that the province wants us to get to, which I believe is 6 months of revenue, which is $1.5 million in operating reserve versus the 400,000 we have now. So, I mean, the idea would be tax everybody in oblivion just to meet this demand from the province is not politically tenable, nor is it any logical at all. But it'd be nice just to make sure we know, based on this tax rate decision, whether our light is going to be green or whether it's going to be red on that document with the province. Like, we don't want to make a tax decision that's going to get us offside on the FIR. So just as long as when the recommendation comes, it's kind of triangulates with that provincial demand, that would be helpful. I just don't want to be the only town in all of Nova Scotia reducing tax rates this year and then have a blinking red FIR. Anyway.
Okay, Councillor Wilson.
You could just have it.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
I'm still puzzled about this, quid pro quo. If we increase the fire rate
Yeah.
by, let's say, 7, that increases for everybody in Mahone Bay. Plus the people we serve, plus whoever we serve in Clearland, et cetera, right? So that revenue has to be higher than a 1 cent reduction in the tax rate for Mahone Bay, that's all.
Just to.
No.
We voted to go double. Like if the
So-
revenue we get for. the
Okay,
increase in the
well,
fire
that was the point I was trying to make earlier, so if we increase the fire rate by a penny. We should be able to reduce the tax rate by 2 cents to make it even, is that correct?
So the issue is that the town is currently subsidizing fire, so to close that gap. The most expedient way you can close the gap would be to increase fire rates. Rather than tax rates, because the fire rate brings in more money. But ultimately, you're still just trying to bring in enough money to close that gap. So you're bringing money faster, but there's no reason to reduce town taxes quicker. If anything, that actually just creates a differential where now fire outside ratepayers end up subsidizing the town as opposed to the reverse.
Okay, fine, that's a different question, my question is, if we wanted to be revenue neutral. Then a 1 cent increase in tax rate would equal roughly a 2 cent increase in tax rate.
Yeah, revenue
That's
neutral
the
on our
town,
side.
yeah.
Correct, okay,
Yeah, that makes
okay,
sense.
that's all he's trying to. get.
Yeah, it's like,
Yeah.
it's like 60% of the fire revenue comes from Home Bay and 40% comes from the district.
So that's, but it's roughly 2.
Yeah, and if we do want to close that gap, which obviously I know, I agree with Joe, I didn't mean to suggest that three cents was something
Yeah, yeah.
that we would contemplate, but. If we need to get there over the next couple of years through a combination of assessment growth and rate increases, and that's what we've always talked about.
It's gonna be fair, right?
But we do want to close that gap, because that gap represents town subsidization of the cost of the service for everyone.
So if we went up a penny on fire and down a penny on tax rate, we would have a windfall profit.
Well,
The higher rate would be less subsidized by town general than it was previously, which is a goal. We're trying to adjust it to reach.
I got you.
I mean, like, yeah, so a penny on 11 cents is $50,000 in revenue. So this is like great, like an extra 50,000 would be very, very helpful to cover our incremental higher costs, but we're spending millions of dollars, right, in fire, so. This is a long-term, we're not gonna keep spending millions all the time, are we, Richard?
I would hope not.
What's the deal, we're gonna spend this money and then not spend any money for 10 years, it's not.
Well, once we get the new stuff at the end of this year, that should be it for at least 6 or 7.
Well, let's hope.
Yay.
Anyway.
Yeah, you need to. Yeah, they're always in violation, yeah.
Council Curry? Comment? Okay.
No, if anybody's just interested, the new aerial stuff, there's been out around town, flying in different places, stuff like that. So it's working out well. In fact, we're planning a training session this weekend before it goes away to the Pittsburgh. Anybody wants to see it on action?
Have we encountered any areas that the truck is going to have a problem?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Council King,
So Mayor, if there's some consensus about 0.5% lower on tax base and 0.5% higher on fire rate, what are your core assumptions now, Ashley, for next year about the other capital related revenues? Like I'm assuming we're assuming no dividend from area.
Yeah, no,
And are you kind of projecting next year's taxes from transfer tax and gas tax to be similar
similar to
year?
this year, yeah, I
Similar
know
this year.
yeah, I say it's pretty status quo on that. The other thing is we're not getting our gas tax
Yeah,
right now, but I did ask and they will release it once the FIRs are filed, so it
If it's
is.
in their reserve, it's in our reserve.
Exactly, but I'd rather.
but is that, and I'm just looking at the file that's actually sent out last night, is that 55,000 just what you've been paid, or that's what they're only gonna pay us 55? It's 85,000 budget,
Yeah, no, I think the 55 is the more accurate, I think, that's what we received.
so they're actually cutting the gas tax.
It appears so. I don't have any specific documentation or analysis on it. But it's hard too, because we kind of been cut off too, so I haven't been able to see if there's any trends. to speak otherwise. So we're 2 years behind now.
55,000 gas tax and we've been getting like 85 for the last 10 years and we double that in the middle of COVID. It's hard, like, it's hard when that,
Hurts.
yeah,
Absolutely.
that's hard.
Just to run over the narrative around, I think it's quite clear, our work with the Plan Mahone Bay dovetails for me with the budget in the sense that we want to ensure that we can do multi-unit housing development because that increases our revenue to cover water, to cover all the support that we have. And so, I guess for residents, when that conversation is being had around where one landed at what we landed at the planning strategy going forward is we need growth, and that growth cannot come without plans and an output. So we're glad that maybe all these things are coming together and hopefully the citizens see that, the residents see that.
Just a quick note, because I had time to look it up, we're still the second highest water rates. And for exactly the reason you'd expect, they're a small size, and Appalachian Royal is still higher than us. But that's the only one.
Fair
So,
enough.
yeah.
So, okay, so have we come to a consensus on the rate? So we're saying a cent or half a cent? Okay. All right,
That's just for your budget draft, right?
correct.
And it's 0.5% down on one and 0.5% up on the other.
Yes.
So that would be arguably zero next change.
For in town, yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, that's really good amount of feedback. If anybody else has any kind of concluding notes, but otherwise we could move to the closed session.
It's like name a tree guy one day.
But of course, the assessment is not happening there.
And I know what we're doing for a second. No, unless we ask questions in this one.
No.
Yeah. So, second.
Okay, moved and seconded that we go into closed session. On the motion, all in favor? Motion's carried. And this is the contract discussion.
1 second,
Yeah.
please.
22. To C.
Well,
Just
Eric,
hold on.
Are we going back to any of these other ones after the person? Like the fact that or anything?